Welcome to Ample Thought for the very first Movie Monday. I'm your host Brendan, and today we're discussing the streaming blockbuster out from Netflix, The Irishman. The Martin Scorsese epic crime film starring three of the biggest names Hollywood has ever been able to offer: Joe Pesci, who effectively came out of retirement and clearly was a huge contributor to the 26 million people who watched it in its first week; Robert De Niro, who interestingly only has a maximum of 2 years between releases of any of the movies he's appeared in since 1974; and last but not least, the masterful Al Pacino. The Irishman received a score of 96% on Rotten Tomatoes and was not only well received the world over, but is almost guaranteed to beat Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for Best Director and Best Picture, which as a Tarantino fan, I have to say is quite the dilemma. Now before I continue, there are spoilers ahead. If you want to see The Irishman with no spoilers, come back and check out this episode after you've seen it. If you've already seen it, or spoilers aren't a problem for you, then here's your last chance to pause, exit the room, or chuck your device out the window. While we're at it, let's address the elephant in the room. Now, a lot of criticism has been issued over the use of CGI and the de-aging process used on the big three actors. Industrial Light and Magic agonized over the youthification process with 1,750 shots over 2 hours worth of footage. Eyes, cheeks, neck, ears, hair, and even microscopic freckles had to be edited, readjusted, recolored, edited again, and deemed perfect before one shot could be settled upon. Some have accepted the change because it's reflective of not the actors themselves, but the characters. Others have argued that such remarkable visuals distract from the key element of immersing the audience into the story as soon as possible. One can't help but think that these same people weren't distracted by the movie Titanic not actually using a refurbished cruise liner from the 19-teens, or Andy Serkis's motion capture roles of Caesar in the Planet of the Apes series, or Gollum, or Snoke, or any of his roles for that matter. But why would they? It's about the story, not the actors themselves. Important to notice, such a dramatic change was used for plot and character development. The actors had to be reminded often they were all playing much younger versions of the characters, so as to not seem anachronistic if older inflections or habits were produced naturally by the actors. Personally, it did take me a few minutes to adjust to the idea of the de-aging, particularly when Pesci and De Niro's characters meet for the first time, which is a complaint many people have said. But I think my astonishment may had more to do with seeing Pesci opposite De Niro for the first time in more than 2 decades. But again, many of us did just go through the same thing very recently with the Star Wars series, so if the de-aging is stopping you from watching this movie, please don't let it. Watch the movie. Based on the 2004 book I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt, most of the people and events are pertaining to actual named members and incidents of the Philadelphia South Jersey crime families between the late 1940s and late 80s. The movie covers the life of Frank Sheeran as he tells it in true Scorsese narrative fashion. The opening credits utilize an extended sequence shot that takes us into an old folks' home and settles upon Frank, who begins the story of how he first started working for the mob. He speaks to us, the audience, as there's formally no one else there to speak to. No one is tending to him, no one is bothering him. He's an island in a place he most certainly physically belongs, but in no way mentally belongs. The story he tells paints this picture by how isolated he becomes from his closest friends, his family, and even himself over the course of time. He mumbles agreement or disagreement throughout the entire movie. He's never completely sure of himself or how to navigate any particular situation. He'd rather be told what to do, what to say, what to think, to be led, prepared. This is testimony for a man's life. We are interpreting and accepting or rejecting all of it. So Frank begins working for the Philly mob and is soon introduced to mob boss Russell Bufalino, played by a decidedly reserved but confident and tensile Pesci. Russell assumes protective father figure over Frank, and though Frank makes a few mistakes along the way, Russell shows him loyalty, wisdom, and optimism. Soon enough, Frank meets Jimmy Hoffa, played by Pacino. Their first conversation is over the phone. This should strike you as something a family friend might do, not a meet and greet, a phone call. And indeed, Hoffa becomes very close to Sheeran and his family, especially with Frank's observant daughter Peggy, played by a remarkably focused Anna Paquin, who steals a few scenes by creative direction from Scorsese and some intense lack of dialogue from Peggy. Now, covering the bulk of this film prohibits brevity in its analysis, or even simple regurgitation. It's a 3.5-hour movie with a big chunk of it showing the ins and outs of Frank's interpersonal relationships, his work with Hoffa and the Teamsters, and building out themes, which I argued could be summed up under 2 narrative umbrellas, which are politics, or diplomacy, and what constitutes family. These areas are most commonly highlighted by the lack of emotion from the people involved in heinous acts of cruelty, and not just the violence aspects. You also notice an echelon, a chain of command in this film unlike any other Scorsese gangster flick, particularly because it's unspoken for the most part. In Casino, as a contrast, the family heads back east approve or disapprove of certain actions. Likewise, in Goodfellas, there are things that happen because of what those characters do. It's a very simple cause and effect. In The Irishman, most of what happens because who the people are. It's the inevitability of their actions that drive the suspense, not the question as to whether or not they will do it. The changes of plans are also from the heads down, not from the main characters themselves. Tommy, in Goodfellas, kills Billy Batts and later pays for what he did. It wasn't predetermined until then that Tommy would die. In The Irishman, it's known that Frank will eventually kill Hoffa because of who he is, Frank, and consequently what he normally wouldn't allow to happen. Russell even tells Frank that's exactly why the plan changed. Is it also a story about looking back at one's life and realizing it's too late to do anything about it? Yes. Are there a dozen multifaceted veneers of narrative here? Always. But with this group of fully realized characters, they only fit in one of 2 categories. Either they are an actual family member, be they biologically family or not, or a tool in which politics or diplomacy will flourish or cease. So where do we begin in this tragic tale of lack of self-awareness and resilience? Frank. Frank is introduced as a former soldier of World War II who had to endure horrible trauma and committed horrible acts in the name of fighting for his homeland, the US. One might call his duty to his country above the level of what one does for their family. One could argue it is a family. He leaves his first wife for a waitress he meets and knew almost immediately that would be the case. Frank says in a second-person format, "There's never a good time to leave your wife, but that's when I left mine." There's not just a callousness to it that one might grow accustomed to in war, but he sees it as just another thing he had to do to get what he needed when he wanted it, just another casualty, and is as matter of fact about it as he is ultimately in the killing of, arguably, his best friend and the person closest to his actual family, Jimmy Hoffa. His daughter finally speaks near the end of the movie as she suspects he killed her surrogate father, Hoffa, and when she confronts him, asking him why he didn't call Hoffa's wife to show concern for his being missing, Frank takes a long pause and curtly says he'll call her. It's not without careful thought, but it is spoken without emotion. Frank, at the end of his life in the film itself, confesses to a priest about what he's done throughout his life and is seeking forgiveness, but for what he's not completely sure. He views his acts as acts of war, with the Teamsters, with other mob factions, within his own crime family, within his actual bloodline. It's all just the business of getting things done the way they are done, like a soldier. More posits of the warlike structure can be taken straight from Sun Tzu's Art of War, with all the elements of knowing your enemy, laying plans of attack, tactical alliances, and opportunity. And even if this could be said for any mob movie, it's the weaving of the Warren family that makes the general feeling more personal and less political, even when the majority of the plot shows those politics at work. So what does constitute family for Frank? When he's approached by the FBI after years of incarceration, he maintains silence about the mob and suggests they talk to his attorney. They tell him his attorney has been dead for years. They coax him, "Frank, why are you doing this? Who are you being quiet for? Everyone is dead. You've got nobody left to protect." He mumbles he has nothing further to add and they leave. So the mob, his friends, his lifestyle with the unions, those are his family. A markedly reflective scene is at the wedding of the daughter of Bill Buffalino, the mob lawyer and iconic labor union boss. It's not Frank's daughter's wedding, not a huge social gathering for his wife and kids. It's his Teamster boss's lawyer and mafia boss's cousin's daughter's wedding. He's just gotten off a plane having killed Hoffa, and in super slow-mo we see him observing the significance of his life as compared to the 100 other mobsters in the church, played to In the Still of the Night by the Five Satins. There's adoration for the continuance of life. There's celebration for a new beginning. There's pride for even the association with a powerful man, but not for Frank. Frank may hope for a fairy tale ending with a trusting, happy daughter, but that's not what he has. He's just killed the most important person to his daughter. He acquires wisdom only immediately after he needs it most. I agree with others that The Irishman is a film about regret and looking back, but more importantly, it's about why we look forward and how our perceptions of what is important to us in the present require independence, bravery, and patience. These should all be components for a successful deployment to or in war, but this is not our understanding of Frank. Our only understanding is that Frank had prisoners of war dig their own graves, and that it wasn't the first time. It didn't require courage. The only way Frank knows how to look forward is when it's too late to do anything about it. He confesses to a priest. He's confessing to us, the audience, from the very beginning, but he didn't confess to his daughter. He could have walked his own daughter down the aisle. He may have even figured out a way not to kill his best friend, though the relationship between Hoffa and the mob was like that of Heath Ledger's Joker to Christian Bale's Batman.
This is what happens
when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object.
Ancillary characters are also crafted with distance to real connection. There's very little love, intrigue, or curiosity about them. When all is said and done, the other mobsters act more like spoiled children fighting in a playground than they do maniacal villains. They one-up each other, hurl insults, are vindictive, but even when one of them gets whacked, it's without the malice we might recall from Tommy and Goodfellas, or the anger another Pesci character, Nicky, spews throughout the story of Casino. The only exceptions to this distance persona is Hoffa and Peggy. Hoffa, who is larger than life, genuine and passionate, gregarious, thoughtful, he doesn't have a boss. There's no hierarchy to his world. He answers to nothing but is conscious of the moment and is unrelenting in his quest for what he calls his union. The Teamsters, ostensibly Frank, whom he trusts with his life, and Peggy are his family. Peggy, who is desperately introspective and pensive, doesn't know what to make of her violent father most of her life. But she doesn't trust him or his mob boss, whom she's told to call Uncle Russell. But she pushes on in her life with a capable smile or understandable sadness, as most of the world did when JFK was killed, a major plot point in this film. The point is, she has courage in hardship due to her commitment to normalcy, making sense of the world, and responding appropriately to situations. Hoffa and Peggy are part of the outside world. They are conscientious objectors to the status quo of the mob and its soldiers, which makes them the two most poignant relationships to our main character, who is either incapable of expressing his true feelings about the life he has lived, or is actually admitting it by his final request for absolution from the Catholic priest at the closing sequence of the film. Altogether, The Irishman is an amazing addition to the already wide array of social anthropological studies Scorsese has made with 25 films in almost 55 years. That's right, Martin Scorsese was already a producer of film back when he was a student at NYU's School of the Arts, now known as Tisch School of the Arts. As a side note, and spoiler alert again, the supporting cast are expertly utilized. Stephen Graham commands a huge role of the film as Tony Pro. He masters the Lower East Side accent and easily holds his own in scenes with De Niro and Pacino alike. I recommend checking out his interview with Netflix UK and Ireland, which I have posted in the description below. Ray Romano, Bobby Cannavale, Sebastian Maniscalco, Harvey Keitel, Dasha Polanco, and Marin Ireland are all well suited for the film. And that's it for Movie Monday. Thank you so much for joining me. Please subscribe, leave a comment below. Maybe we could talk about anything you like. Make a comment, leave a question, anything you want. Next month, I'll be doing a Movie Monday based on Valentine's Day. So do we go rom-com? Do we go old? Do we go new? We'll see. Check out next time for Movie Monday. Thank you. This has been Ample Thought.